Okay, I will start recording. Um, so, uh, I have a webcam now. That is thanks to Evan. Uh, I believe I'm still going to share my screen now. Um, I don't know how that will work. Boom. Yeah. Maybe that works. I don't. I guess you can decide whether or not you want to look at me or you want to look at the text. Um, so yeah, uh, it's been a couple weeks since we did this. Um, Jessica was sick with flu B, very specifically, which lasted about a week. Um, so I do have more notes for this week so far. I think this is the most notes that I have for a week, and there's a lot that I want to try and cover. I don't know if I will do that successfully. And I already know that there are some things, especially towards the end of this section, that I probably won't get to fully talk about, and I'll probably I'll probably just put some discussion questions about it um, as uh, we go through. Oh, I need to think about the fact that if I change my screen, I change the position of the webcam. So yeah, so we finished off last time mid chapter 3, so we're starting off at verse 14. Okay, and this is the curse. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." To the woman he said, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing; in pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." And to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it for all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The man called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. And the Lord God made for Adam and his wife garments of skin, and clothed them. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." Therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay, so we're going to spend most of the time talking about the curse. Um, so there's a couple things that I want to say about the curse, and then I'm going to kind of spitball here. um, One of the main things that I want to try um, and put forward is the idea that um, the the curse. I really don't think that we should see the curse that God gives here as an active punishment. I think for most of my life and the way that I've ever heard it talked and discussed, it, um, it's um, like things were one way, and now the world is a different way because of um, because of the fall. And what I want to try and argue is that I don't think that's really the best way to view what's going on here. What I think the best way to view the curse is really it's to view it as um, it's the reality of what the world is that we find ourselves in. It's I think a helpful way of thinking about it, and so I've mentioned it a couple of times. Um, More and more as I get older, not as I think about this, I think a lot of elements of the Genesis, early Genesis narratives, and even going to a couple of later chapters, um, really maps on to um, this the standard growth of a human life. Um, and so when when we think about Adam and Eve in the child or Adam and Eve in the garden, really I think we should think about it as kids living with their parents. And you could you could very easily um so like let's pretend one day that I kick my daughters or one of my daughters out. When that happens, I could easily say to them like, "Cursed are you, for now you need to do work," right, or something like that, right? The the thing that what I'm trying to argue is that, right, like when I kick my daughter out of the house, the world didn't magically change. Her relationship with me as her protector is what changed, right? And so now, because you don't have that protection, something else has to take place. Um, and really, I think that's the best way to kind of understand what's going on here. Um, a couple of other things that I want to point out is that um, there's kind of a blame order that happens in the previous section, right? God calls out to Adam and he asks Adam what's going on. Adam puts the blame on Eve, and then Eve puts the blame on the serpent. And now the curse is going to go back the other way. It's going to start with the serpent, then go to the woman, and then go to Adam. Also, note that this verse 17 here is actually the first time that, at least in the ESV, they choose to translate um, Adam as Adam. And I think that at least part of that decision is because on the previous times it's Ha Adam, and so it's the man. And then this one is the first one where it drops that article and it just says Adam. It's not Ha Adam. I don't know, but that is what it is. So let's start with um, going over the serpents. Um, because you have done this, cursed are you above all the livestock and all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. Okay. Um, I want to point out before we go any further, right? Dust that you're eating, right? Man is dust, right? So the thing that the serpent is eating is the corpses of men, right? Um, One of the things that's interesting about this, right, is we talked a lot about like what is this serpent? Um, if the serpent is just a regular snake, it seems weird that the curse is for it to go about on its belly, which it presumably already does. Um, but it it is interesting to me because that line makes you think that, oh, okay, this is talking about an actual snake or something along those lines. But then this line, and dust you shall eat, that makes, at least for me, it makes you think, oh, it's not an actual snake because snakes don't eat dust. Um, Before we started, or before I decided to go back and cover these beginning chapters of Genesis, um, part of the reason, I think I stated that part of the reason why I decided to recover them, one was that I wanted to just film them because previously I hadn't filmed them. But the second reason is that since having kids, um, there's been a number of things about Genesis that I have uh, rethought or come to kind of some kind of new conclusion. And this actually is one of them. And it's because one of the things that I think that you should be doing whenever you're thinking about this is think about what kind of a creature goes about on its belly eating dust. Um, and the thing is that it's not snakes. Um, if you want to know what the creature is that goes about on its belly eating dust, um, it's kids. Um, it's human babies. Human babies are the things that crawl around and eat dust. Um, which, if you then think about how I talked about how if this whole thing is kind of about is like a superimposed allegory of a person growing up, there's something interesting going on with as that's happening, the thing that's happening to the enemy of your soul is is the opposite of that. And I want to reread, and so this is where I've talked about this a little bit in the past weeks, and I've kind of want to hammer on this point again and again, where um where I talk about maturity and maturity as a measure of how far you can see, how that changes with elevation, the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Um, you might have a lot of knowledge, but having wisdom comes from the ability to see out farther. And remember, if your elevation is lower, you can't see as far. And so, if the serpent is cursed to go about on his belly, he is cursed to not have wisdom. And instead, what he does is he eats dust. And so, that dust is the offspring, it's the dead carcasses of human beings, right? I want to reread some of my other notes. The knowledge of good and evil as raw data. The snake, in a sense, is a redditor. I'm going to reread the quote from Chesterton too. Because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, "Do it again," and the grown up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, "Do it again," to the sun, and every evening, "Do it again," to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never gotten tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. The repetition in nature may not be mere reoccurrence, it may be a theatrical encore. The point that I want to try and make is the idea of exulting in monotony is equivalent to the idea that we talked about before about walking with God. Okay. The reason why I want to bring that up is because of this part right here. And he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Okay, this section right here. So I'm trying to figure out how to best talk about this kind of next section. This is the portion where if you go back and look at everything that we've discussed about, like, okay, what is the proper way to like interpret like a portion of the text and everything. This is the one where I talk about people. You'll get into arguments about what is going on here and what's the proper way to understand this, because um, is this a prophecy? Most Christians, whenever they interpret this section, they'll say that yes, this is a prophecy, and it's a prophecy very specifically of that the offspring. So I believe it's singular. Yes, noun, common, singular, masculine. That her offspring, the offspring, that it is one single offspring that will bruise the head of the serpent. And this is supposed to be an image of Jesus. And the reason why it's an image of Jesus is because he crushes the head of the snake. That's what this bruise. You can substitute this. So actually, yeah, actually, why is it not coming up? Yeah, okay. To bruise, crush. There you go, crush. Right? He shall crush the head, and he shall crush or bruise his heel. And so this is supposed to show that this offspring is going to crush the head of the snake, but in the process also be injured in some way. And people say, okay, well, this is a picture of the cross. However, if you look at more of kind of a Jewish understanding of this passage, they'll say that this is not a specific prophecy about one individual. This is describing, well, you kind of have two methods. Either it's describing all of humanity, and so all of humanity kind of does this crushing of chaos in order to establish order, or specifically that her offspring will be Israel, and so it's a prophecy that's about collective Israel and not necessarily like one individual person. This is one of the many places where, in my opinion, the best way is to just take a both and all approach to it. I think that it is perfectly acceptable to interpret this passage um, with all of those different ideas in mind. And it actually, in many ways, I think that we're supposed to um, have the multitude uh, uh, of interpretations in mind, and I think that you can make the connection pretty easy to for understanding. Okay, why should we think of this as Jesus? As why should we think of the offspring as Jesus? And at the same time, why should we think of the offspring that crushes the head of the snake is also just in generic human beings? Um, and the way that you, in my opinion, that you can make that jump pretty easily is to understand that um, crushing the head of the snake, right? So with your foot, right? So you should imagine a foot coming down, right? And that symbolically, what that is the exact same symbol as um, walking on water, right? And it's actually pretty easy to like. All you have to do is sub out the water for the serpent, right? It's the same physical motion, right? You just uh, so crushing the head of the serpent and walking on water, symbolically the same thing. And as soon as you do that, then you understand, okay, well, what happened with walking on water? Well, Jesus does it first, right? And then Peter comes out and does it, right? And Peter in that scenario is supposed to be a representation of everybody else. And so as soon as you make that connection, okay, then I think it's pretty easy to understand that I think it's a fair interpretation to say that this applies both to Jesus and to everyone that is following after Jesus. Um, okay. I want to go back a little bit. Okay, let me just read my notes here. Where are we at time wise? We're about halfway. Oh, great. Um, the serpent is cursed to go around eating the carcasses of humans. He is on the earth. He is collecting raw potential. He has all of the knowledge of the world and none of the wisdom. He isn't elevated in any way. He isn't mature. He can't walk with God. One of the things that, um, one of the questions that will come up whenever you start to kind of, I think naturally, when you start to study eschatology and the whole idea of what's going to happen to Satan, and couple that with this idea of why does we have this idea that Satan knows the Bible better than your average Christian, right? We get this from the temptation um, story. And so this kind of question arises naturally, which is why does Satan keep attacking us and trying to fight God, even though he knows he's going to lose? I think that's answered right here, right? It's answered by the fact that he is not mature. He Satan doesn't have wisdom in the sense that he can't see far. He is on his belly. He is down on the ground. He can see the knowledge of good and evil and how it affects men and how um, it affects the world, but he doesn't have the wisdom to to stop. And I say all of that um, um, and so because of this, so let me finish my notes. He will serve at the serpent will serve as pain and suffering, for the offspring is meant to crush it. Okay, Um, One of the other points that I want to make with the curses that I haven't said yet is that in addition to just being natural, I think it's just a natural outgrowth of the way that the world is. I also think that the curses the curses are or the curse is actually intended to eventually lead to the restoration um, of Eden. The purpose of the curse, like if you look at each section and how they affect their correspondent, um, I think the curse is actually supposed to lead back uh, to Eden. Um, I also want to make the point that yes, I do think that this curse is specifically talking about the serpent as in Satan, but also I think that it is possible for a person to become serpent like. It is possible for a person to become so consumed with um, kind of the just raw knowledge of good and evil that is in the world, and it can affect you so that you essentially are no longer in the class of human, and like you're no longer in one of these classes. You're instead in a new class, which is essentially demonic. Um, and I think you can apply this pretty easily. This is why I said the snake is a redditor, um, right? You just look at the people. Just go look at the recent trend of trans shooters, right? Uh, Pretty much all of them are people that spent way too much time um, just consuming the terrible raw data of the world. And the thing is that in some ways, I think the only thing that can fix a lot of those situations is is if they're crushed. Um, and yeah, that's unfortunate, but I think that it's actually the way that it has to happen a lot of the times. Um, uh, I think that was most that I wanted to say about that section. Does anybody have any questions or clarity that they want me to say about just the serpent part? I know there's only like a couple of you here, but okay, I'll go on to the next part. Um, so the woman's curse. Uh, I think it should be noted how short um, the woman's curse is in comparison to the other curses. Um, I think it's also interesting that I think the woman's curse is the curse that probably gets talked about the most, at least in my experience. Um, uh, Specifically, the part about childbearing being in pain. Um, there is a lot of debate about what this actually means. Um, for for one reason is because it says, "I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing." Um, at least to me, that signifies that okay, well, that means that it wasn't painless before. There was some pain before the curse. Now there's just more. Um, so what exactly is going on with that? Um, the other is you'll hear this idea that pain is probably not the best way to understand this word. Um, Maybe a better way to understand it is something like sorrow. So you'll see people talk about that, and usually what people mean by that is that perhaps what's happening is that now, uh, because death is now in the world, it is possible for children to die during childbearing, whereas previously before the fall, um, maybe that wouldn't have happened because there was no death. Um, that's uh, one kind of interpretation of it. Um, I'm I don't have strong opinions about whether I agree with that or not. Um, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the your desire shall be for your husband. To me, I think it's interesting that it uh, actually that for most of what I've seen, people do interpret this as husband, whereas I think it makes much more sense to just think of it as the word man. It's the word ish, uh, which I think most of the time actually just ends up being man. And to me, um, this is one of those things where, um, again, I think if you think about this in the terms of, okay, you're being kicked out of your parents' house, this actually makes uh, a lot more sense as to what's going on here, right? Um, right. If you just think of, um, I mean, we can do this in our own time, but it would have been even more severe for women, even going back, I don't know, 150 years or more, right? Um, if you if a woman didn't have a man for provision and protection, uh, they were they were in trouble. Um, and part of the reason why he'll rule over you is because you are in a vulnerable, like, women are in a vulnerable state, right? Um, oh, that was one of the other things that I wanted to mention is that um, the results of the curses should be thought of as a natural consequence of acquiring more of the knowledge of good and evil. And so, whenever you acquire more of the knowledge of good and evil, you come to understand your own vulnerabilities. And so, right, in the same way that if you get thrown out of the house and you're on your own, you come to know your own vulnerabilities. And for women, the vulnerabilities are the fact that they have this connection to their children and can have pain associated with having their children, and the fact that they are vulnerable and are subject to, like, the whims of men, which is essentially what this is. Um, and as we go on in Genesis, we'll see is a continuous and growing problem. Um, for the man, the result for him in um, recognizing his own vulnerability becomes associated with working. Um, and that's why, right? The primary curse for the man has to do with the acquisition of food. Um, I also think that it's interesting because it includes the part of, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and also this should be understood as the voice of your woman, your isha, right? So man, ish, your wife, isha, and you've done all of these things because you have listened to your wife and your woman, and you're in this situation that you now find yourself. Your curse is that you have to provide food. Um, and I think, like, as you know, uh, uh, as a husband, as a man, like, a lot of times that is just the thing that you do, right? Um, and so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like, yes, this is the curse, but also this is the way, at least in part, that you get out of the curse, right? The way that you that you deal with your vulnerability in the fallen state that you find yourself in is that you you know get a wife and you provide food and shelter and housing and everything for them, and that is and that doing that process, especially if you're doing it with walking with God, is actually the equivalent of stomping on chaos and bringing about order, right? And so these things are interconnected. Um, Also, actually, I thought about posting this, and I didn't. I wanted to bookmark it. Um, there was I believe. Let's just go. Weinstein, Joe Rogan. Brett Weinstein on Joe Rogan recently? Yes. Okay. Then like 3 weeks ago. Okay. If you have time, go watch this. I haven't watched the whole thing, but I believe there was a clip going around um, about that, and in it, Brett Weinstein makes the point that um, for basically since the birth control pill, we have lived in a world where um, the consequences of reproduction basically no longer apply to humans, and uh, that a lot of our current societal ills that we're dealing with is precisely because we have come up with a technology, a form of sublimation, uh, to essentially eliminate this portion of the reason why I'm talking about this right now. I don't think he said this, but the reason why I'm talking about right now is essentially we came up with a technology to eliminate this aspect of the curse. And but then he goes on to make the point that, and if you've seen any clips from Elon, whenever he starts talking about AI and humanoid robotics and self-driving cars and all of this stuff, Elon has this idea that within the next 10, 20, 30 years, essentially there will be no more poverty, and all goods and services will become insanely cheap, and the standard of living for everybody will be incredibly high, and basically nobody will have to work and all of this stuff. And so essentially, that's a promise that we're going to eliminate this aspect of the curse. And in his clip, he goes on to basically say that's going to be a really bad thing, and we don't know how those really bad things are going to affect us. And this is sort of I wanted to I meant to bookmark the clip and I didn't, but I sort of want to use that as evidence for saying, one, this shows you that in some way the curse is actually good for humans, and two, that these are natural consequences, and that eliminating these natural consequences are actually um, going to be a problem. Um, we only have a little bit of time left. Okay, let's. Uh, the only other thing that I wanted to point out is the symbolic nature of thorns and thistles. Thorns and thistles are representative of problems that are going to come up. Um, Also, this question of, did these problems exist before, or are they new now? I argue that they existed before, but whenever mankind was in the protection of God, they didn't have those, right? In the same way that you live in a house, you're not dealing with thorns and thistles. But if you're naked and you run outside, all of a sudden you're going to have to start dealing with thorns and thistles, right? Your vulnerabilities come out and attack you as soon as you get out into the rest of the world. Um, any any questions, comments, or anything that anybody wants to say about uh, those parts of the curse, either the female or male sections?
Yeah. So, in talking about what you mentioned with the woman's curse, um, and specifically the idea of the wording could be, maybe it's not apt to necessarily say an increase in pain, but perhaps an increase in sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it made me think a lot about the way Jordan Peterson went in analyzing uh, the eating of the fruit as a kind of an awareness of what makes yourself vulnerable.
Yeah.
Hence, what, like, why that's associated with nakedness, and also how it could be linked to bad or evil, because once you know your vulnerabilities, you know someone else's
Correct.
vulnerabilities.
Correct.
um but another way he also talked about that is, it was a way for us to kind of have a reckoning with the idea of the future as well. Like, we have a knowledge of
Yes.
like a conscious. It's linked to a consciousness above, like, an animal level consciousness, where we can actually, like, reason with the future and kind of grapple with that.
Yes. And in that you're in that understanding that in order to bring forth children, you are going to have to be in pain, is is a sacrifice of. So both. So actually, it's a good thing that you bring that up, because actually that helps make my point that what's going on here is an advance of maturity, right? And so is therefore the opposite of going down on your belly is and looking at the ground. The opposite of looking down at the ground is to look forward into the future, to know that if I make a sacrifice of pain now, in the future I can have children, and to understand. And this is going to be this is an idea that we will. I know we talked about the last time we covered Genesis, and we'll be expanding on in the future. Is that children fundamentally are children are the key to immortality, right? Um, like if you want to live forever, the way that you do it is you have children, right? If you want to live in the future, if you want to go out forward, is to have children. This is why in the Old Testament, if you to understand the like what the Israelites thought of as the quote unquote worst thing that could happen to you, the quote unquote worst thing that could happen to you was for you to be quote unquote cut off. And what cut off meant was that you didn't have children. Um, this is why they have the practice of levirate marriage, which levirate marriage uh, um, is, where if a husband dies, then the brother of the husband uh, is supposed to um, consummate with the wife in order to have a child. And and it's important to note that when that child comes forth, that child is not considered the son the uh, of the biological father. The it is considered the child son. I said son, but it could be son or daughter, right? That child is not considered the child fully of the actual biological father. It is considered the child of the deceased father, right? And that becomes that's how the line gets redeemed, and so that the line can go on. In the same way, that is similar to how you sacrifice work um, at the present, so that you can bring forth the plants of the field that you eat, right? Those are all connected ideas, and those are all ideas that are connected with being able to see in the future, and um, being able to be mature. Um, I'm now reminded of another idea that I want to connect with all of this, that goes with maturity and being able to see. Um, there there is this idea that you'll hear from different people online, um, and it is an idea that I I I kind of fundamentally agreed with, even before I had kids. But the idea is that you are not, so like Sargon of Akkad says this, a couple of other people, but it's the idea that you are not an adult until you have a child. Um, there's a lot of ways in which that idea is wrong, but I want to talk about the way in which it's true. Um, Before having kids, e- um, even even once I was married, you there are certain aspects of the future that is hard for you to see. Like, I was like, okay, I don't necessarily know what I'm gonna be doing for a job. I don't necessarily know what I'm gonna be doing for where I'm living, and all of this stuff. But you can generally map some of those things out. And at least for me, for most of my life, I was able to do that, like, probably 4 or 5 years ahead in advance. Like, you can kind of comfortably assume, like, okay, I roughly know that these sort of things are going to happen 4 to 5 years in advance. When you have a kid, though, you you suddenly have this very strange experience, which is that certain events are not mapped out just 4 or 5 years in advance. They're mapped out like 10, 15, 20, 30 years in advance. And I equate it to, like, if you're in so if you're playing like a video game, and there's like a if you're playing like a strategy game, there's usually fog of war, right? So there's an area that you can see, and then there's an area that you can't see. But the thing is that there's often levels of fog of war. So like there's complete blackness or complete gray, and there's nothing there. But then there's also like a half fog of war, which maybe like shows the terrain and shows some other things, but doesn't show you every single specific thing in there. Having a kid is like having that fog of war partially leave over a big course of your life. Um, it like I remember having the thought like after Sophia was born, I was like, oh, in about 18 years, I am going to be at a grad party for this kid. And I just remember thinking like that's a very strange thought to have. I have never had that thought about an event that is so far out into the future. Um, but that's one of the things that having kids, and that's sort of the mindset that I want us to get around whenever I talk about like maturity, because then like the ability, like my ability to see that far out into the future means, okay, I need to act differently to be able to get to that point in the future in a way that is actually like what I want, right? Um, if that makes sense. Sorry to completely overtake your point, Evan, but did you have anything else you wanted to say with that?
I did, and I think it's okay. Mostly just that you did have more to say. I'm glad that what I said brought more out of you on that. But
Yeah.
what I was going to say was with that as um, an understanding that perhaps what what the increase in pain or sorrow actually is akin to what most young women have of impressions of getting pregnant these days, which would be my life is now over.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and so maybe the pain isn't necessarily multiplied in a physical sense, but just you have knowledge of the pain. And actually, I think the best way that I can make this personal to me, I have never been stung by a bee.
Right.
It's never happened in my life to my knowledge. Maybe it
No,
ever
you
had
never
happened.
were. No.
As such, I actually have a my friends will know this, a rather irrational uh, 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 fear of being stung by bees because
Hmm.
it's never happened to me, but I understand that it has pain, but I've never experienced it. So in my mind, um, that that pain is elevated, multiplied, you could say. Um, and so with a combination of an understanding of this will dominate my life, and it's a physical pain that is universally described amongst women as like the worst pain they experience in their life. I
Hmm.
think it's that reckoning with the future that multiplies the pain, as opposed to like an animal going through birth. They'll go through the instinct of mating and then having children. That'll just be a natural process, and we can understand that. I think most animals actually probably do have some kind of pain in childbearing, but it's not a I don't have to they don't have to grapple with that knowledge well in advance.
Yeah, and I think to some degree, like you can think of it in the like the sense of, okay, because I have, right, if I understand your point, I think what you're trying to say is something along the lines of like, because I have knowledge of how much like having this child is going to take out of me and to take from me, um like because like, right, because I have this kid, I need more resources. Like I need right? Like this is a different like right. I think it's referred to someone as nesting, right? But like there's like like a woman that's going to have a kid who's a teen mom, right, and is by herself is going to be freaking out a lot more, is going to be in a lot more pain and suffering and sorrow than someone that is in a stable relationship, right? And women can see that, right? Which is why it becomes that their desire is for their husband, because like their desire is for their husband because they want the husband to be able to work the land and provide these resources for them, right? Um, and 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 so part of that pain might be from the fact of, oh crud, do I now have to be with a husband who is going to rule over me and be a jerk, right? Like I think all of those things, yeah, are like connected. If I'm understanding how you're trying to say that. Okay, so we're we're almost at an hour. Um, uh, I'll probably post some discussion questions about these, especially with now Eve's name becoming Eve and not just woman. Um, I want to talk a little bit about and the Lord God made for Adam and his wife garments of skin and clothed them. This is, this is related to what I was talking about technology and what we'll keep talking about technology. Um, I also want to talk about this a little bit actually because of a thing that Katie sent me. Katie sent me a thing. I believe it was something on Instagram that was um, basically it was a person trying to say they were trying to connect the word here garments to basically every other place in the Bible where the word garments gets used. And so Katie ended up asking me a question uh, where she goes, "Did God make priestly garments for Adam and Eve?" And she thought this because of this post that was like, "Oh, the same word that's used for garments here is used for the garments in describing a robe and all this other stuff." And I just want to talk about this also to kind of highlight another functionality of the Step Bible, which is when you click on a word, in addition to it saying the meaning of the word, it also has a thing right here where it says the other places where it occurs, and you can click on that and you can read them all. And I wanted to say that because whenever I talked to Katie about this, I was like, okay, no, the word for garment there, it just means tunic, right? And now it is true that most of those other places where it talks about tunics, the tunics are very nice. So like for Joseph, and that it's a coat of many colors. It's a very nice tunic. Uh, Later on, it's talking about the priest's robes, and it is like it's a fancy one that has a bunch of jewelry and fine linen and all this other stuff. But also, there's spots like here where it says, "And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore." Okay, Tamar um, is just a woman wearing regular clothes, and so like that's not a special one. And so um, I made I basically the response that I gave to her was um, whenever like I'm using the Step Bible to um, look at like the multiple definitions of the word, I'm not trying to find like hidden meanings in the word. Um, it should just be understood that Hebrew, like most old languages, actually, um, has fewer words in general. So old language old languages naturally have fewer words than newer languages. Like you can just compare this to from like old English to like new English. That um, like modern English has a lot more words in it than old English does, and this happens very naturally, and it's in the same kind of vein of why like Windows 95 is a much smaller program, much smaller operating system than Windows 11, because Windows 11 came out in like the past couple of years, and Windows 95 came out in 1995, and they've had 30 years to develop new software that they can put into it. And so newer languages have more words, and older languages have less words. And so the words get used for a multitude of things. And so you shouldn't use these to look up hidden meanings, but I think the way that you should do it is to understand that, oh, you can draw a connection between those things. And so I think it's perfectly valid to be like, oh, yes, we should think like you shouldn't think of these garments that God is making for Adam and Eve as priestly garments, because God's not making them priests. He's kicking them out of the garden. He's not making them priest robes. He's just making them robes. But when God is making um, the robes for the priests to kind of come back into the new Eden, you should recognize that the garments that the priests are using are working in a similar function to the garments, to how the garments are working here. They're working as a form, tool of protection. They are a tool um, of uh, what's the word, to supplement, of supplementation, to supplement the fact that human beings are vulnerable. That's what they're doing. Um, I also want to use this moment to pitch uh, Jonathan Pajot's um, Garments of Skin comic book, where he essentially has a whole thing about how um, he treats the Garments of Skin as like a um, almost like a superpower relic that like goes through time, like goes through time, but is also like representative of technology and stuff. It's kind of interesting. I think it's supposed to be a series that I just have the first one. I think there's more coming out. I want to wrap this up. Um, yeah, I don't have any more notes for the rest of it except for um that I do think it's interesting that God kind of validates the idea that man has become um, like him to some degree, knowing good and evil, and uh, so that goes back to the idea of to me of it's almost a validation of what the serpent said previously, of how I was like, yeah, the serpent isn't really technically lying. He's lying by a different means. Um, Also, I wish I had more to say about the flaming sword that flies around. Um, but uh, really, I just think that's a cool Easter egg to put into a game of D&D. Um, so that exhausts my notes, and for most of what I wanted to say for this chapter. Any final concluding thoughts, comments, things that people wanted to talk about?
I find it interesting that in the curse section, God doesn't actually say that the woman and the man are cursed. He says that the snake and the ground are cursed, but he just like So I think that leads into it's just the consequences of what happened.
Yes.
Not like a
Actually, there's something else that I wanted to say that it was a note that I skipped over. Cursed is the ground because of you. You can read that as for the sake of. So cursed is the ground for the sake of you. For like all of like these because it can be for the sake of you, right? Um, I think if you read these becauses in that way, it will help you to understand what I meant where I said that the curses are actually meant to be like a path of uh redemption, right? It's like it's the ground is cursed for your sake, right? It it's 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 for you that it was made this way. Like God made the world this way in a way that would be harsh so that certain things would be accomplished. Um yeah, sorry. Sorry to interrupt you, Ryan, but yeah.
yeah, and then also I don't quite know what to make of it, but the in verse 22 where it says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." And then it just seems like there was more there that God had like
Mhm.
on his mind, but it just doesn't say like what the rest of that sentence is.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, therefore they send him out. But it's like, I just think that's interesting, and I'm interested in like what the thought process is of what that could be,
Yeah, so to
like the
me,
extra steps.
so to me, um yeah, I guess I didn't really talk about that because to me it's kind of obvious as to what the right, you're right. It does like kind of like trail off and like okay, well what's the next steps? Um the next steps are like the rest of the story, right? And we don't fully get there right away. Like it takes a few chapters for us to get there, but the next steps are um, the next steps are actually getting us to this state, right? Um, this state, the man is like one of us, knowing good and evil, and he lives forever. That's actually the end state, right? Um, but right, there's a reason why God can't have this now, right? He recognizes that now isn't the time for this state to be the final state.
Mhm.
This is exactly what I mean by not having maturity, right? And we see this same kind of thought process happen with Jesus, right? Because what does Satan offer Jesus? Satan takes Jesus to the top of the temple and he goes, "Hey, do you want to have all of the nations? I can give them to you. You just have to take them in an unwise way right now." Right? Well, he doesn't say that. He says, "Worship me." But Jesus worshiping Satan is the same thing as taking that thing that he wants, that end state that he wants. He takes it now, but he shouldn't take it now. There's a taking it now is an unwise thing to do. There are steps that need to happen in order to get to that proper end state. And so it's like, okay, we've gotten the ball rolling, right? God has God, right? I take the view that God had a plan, and He set up a world, but time didn't really, in some ways, and this is kind of a Jordan Peterson idea too. Time didn't really start, but at this point, where after the fall, time kind of has started, right? And a plan needs to form and take place, and it finishes at the cross where Jesus says, "And it is done." Right?
Yeah, that was where I go with that, is like, if humans continued to have access to the tree of life, then Christ couldn't have been crucified because he would not be able to be killed, and that would be bad for humanity because that was the vehicle of redemption. So I that's kind of how I've always filled in that little like the trailing thought. It's like, if we let them have this now, then like the actual plan of redemption is not going to be able to be come
Well,
to fruition.
I have to stop. I have a child crying, so
Okay.
thank you all. I'm gonna end the
All right.
recording there.